On October 22nd of last year, Senator Murray and Governor Inslee of Washington State released a statement saying they were initiating a joint state-federal process to look at whether the services provided by the lower Snake River dams can be replaced. They planned on initiating a process where they would interview stakeholders to get their perspectives and then look at existing studies to determine the answer. The initial Murray-Inslee report was released on June 9th, and they are accepting comments through July 11th. The final report is scheduled for release the summer of 2022. It was July 31st, but it has now been delayed. Shortly thereafter, Senator Murray and Governor Inslee are slated to make a recommendation of what to do with the dams. There is a lot to be concerned about in this process, and Northwest River Partners has been very engaged, including the fact, in terms of concerns, that Governor Inslee made a public pre-announcement about the process jointly with Vice Chair Shannon Wheeler of the Nez Perce Tribe at a Washington Conservation Voters event. We greatly respect Vice Chair Wheeler and the Nez Perce Tribe, but the fact is that they are leading advocates for removing the lower Snake River dams. So I'm sure that they would feel uneasy if Governor Inslee had announced the process jointly with Northwest River Partners. Additionally, the process question was phrased as something that's not really a question at all. It said, can the services provided by the lower Snake River dams be replaced? Well, as you know, you can't really answer that in a vacuum. Anything potentially can be done. It doesn't necessarily mean it's good public policy. So when the draft report came out on June 9th, it wasn't a huge shock to see that, yes, they determined it can be done. But it really does, it looks at this in a vacuum instead of what it will take to achieve the region's carbon-free goals by 2045 and what the loss of the dams might mean to that achievement. And for that reason, we're really concerned. We are encouraging all of our members to reach out to Governor Inslee and especially to Senator Murray and her team to engage on this issue. And we have sent out an email and partnered with the Public Power Council on their own as we try to engage customers and members to really get involved in this moment that could make the difference for the future of the lower Snake River dams and the region's clean, affordable energy future.
We started in hard times to bring us all into the laughter.
Welcome to Public Power Underground.
You got to read the script. Do you have the script up, Kurt?
No.
Oh man, I got so much scripted for you, Kurt. Welcome to Public Power Underground, on the Public Power Department's premier infotainment program.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Here, just 1 second.
I'm roll with it. We're gonna roll with it. We're gonna leave this all in. Okay, welcome to Public Power Underground, the Power Department's premier infotainment program that covers electric utility and electric utility adjacent news from a Power Department perspective. Imagine this is in Kurt's voice, because Kurt's a celebrity guest host. And then Kurt, do you have it up now? Because now you introduce yourself.
Oh, I know who I am, so I don't need it. My name is Kurt Miller.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. You need the official title of the Anadromous Championship belt. I'll do it for you. Ready, Kurt?
Okay. Yes.
Kurt Miller is an original contributor to the Underground. Really, the old school original. Like, I think you were the first guest.
Yeah, I was the first.
I think you were the first guest. He is the sturgeon weight anadromous champion. You can see the belt if you're on YouTube. He's got it strung over his foot. It's bestowed on the best friend of the Underground because he keeps coming back. He is also the executive director of Northwest River Partners and this week's celebrity guest host. Kurt, say your name in your own voice. I'm Kurt
Miller, Northwest River Partners, and anadromous belt champion.
That's right. So now you got to get the script up while Dan introduces himself.
Okay, I'll mute and go to the script.
Unfortunately, I also remember who I am. I'm Dan Catchpole, contributing editor of Clearing Up, co-host of News Data's Energy West podcast, and this week's podcast ambassador from News Data.
And this is KC Mehaffey. I cover fish issues for Clearing Up, and I'm the editor of News Data's Northwest Fish Letter.
And I'm the creative director of Public Power Underground, the lead writer of the scripts that Kurt has decided to ignore, the manager of Clatskanie IP's Power Department, and today's producer for the episode. So this is all my fault when it doesn't go according to plan. Kurt, do you have the script up?
This is season 4.
Oh, we gotta do some banter in between. We gotta do some banter.
Kurt did not prepare.
Kurt's been so busy that he didn't do any sort of prep for this.
Actually, that is true. I do have a really good excuse with the Murray-Inslee process and the report that's going out. I have, you can see my hair has been on fire. As a matter of fact, there is no hair left. So it has been a really busy time. But I do love Public Power Underground. So I am very sorry for having shirked the preparation responsibilities.
No, you could never betray us because you're so ingrained in our culture at Public Power Underground. You gave us a chance when few else would.
That's awesome.
KC, welcome back. You were also one of the earliest contributors.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it was fun. I think we talked about invasive mussels or something, or
That's right. What are they? The zebra mussels?
Zebra mussels, yeah.
That's right.
So, they're
And
still
Dan,
alive,
welcome back.
but, yeah, drain and dry, and I forget the other one, but don't take
got
your
one.
boat out without checking.
Absolutely not.
Seriously.
Never take your boat out. Yep. Dan, you're out early, so we got to get this done in record time, don't we?
Yep. Yeah. My ride for my kids from camp fell through, so I gotta.
So we got to let you. Even if you got to drop us to get out of here, save your kids. Kids first, family first. It's the mantra that we're going to start now. Kurt, we're ready for you. Now, do you got the script up?
Okay, yes, I just missed the banter part, that's all. Okay, this is season 4, episode 15. On today's recording, and we discuss the Murray-Inslee draft report, Australia's electric market getting suspended, natural gas price slumped after a fire, transfer of management of a fish hatchery to the Nez Perce Tribe, and falconry at the Dalles Dam. We also debrief on the market indicators with Aaron reports and try to make it all infotaining with friendly conversation in between. Before we get started, Dan is going to read a quick word from our presenting sponsor.
Thanks, Kurt. The presenting sponsor of Public Power Underground is the Energy Authority. The Energy Authority is a nonprofit energy portfolio management company owned by public power entities like us. TEA's mission is to help clients maximize the value of their assets and meet their power supply goals. TEA does this by providing expertise in energy trading, advanced analytics, renewable solutions, and a whole lot more. Over 60 public power utilities have partnered with TEA to tackle their energy future. So if you are looking for an energy authority to partner with in navigating the uncertain future of our industry, visit TEAinc.org to learn more. That's TEAinc.org. The Energy Authority. They're as underground as it gets.
I'm really glad that you're the one who read that, Dan, because I would have said T Inc. So well done. Okay, so thanks, Dan. We're starting this week, like most weeks, checking in on power market indicators in the Northwest with our first segment, Aaron Reports. Take it away, Paul.
This is Aaron Reports with Paul Reporting, where we try to get up to speed on Northwest market indicators for June 28th, 2022. I'm Paul Dockery, and I've got your market update for the week. Spot market power in the Northwest for delivery today is at 75.50, with natural gas at 4.55 per MMBTU, translating to a spark spread of 43.63 and a heat rate of 16,600. Spot power in Southern California is at 77.57, and Northern California 80.83, and the Southwest at 80.25. July power at Mid-C is down $7.05 from a week ago to 58.95, and Sumas gas is at $5.64, translating to a heat rate of 10,500. July power at Palo Verde is down $26.20 from a week ago to $134.45 per MMBTU. Or per megawatt hour, per MMBTU.
Whoa,
That's
whoa.
just silly. Holy cow. August power at Mid-C is trading down $10 per megawatt hour from a week ago to $130, with Sumas gas at $6.24, translating to a heat rate of 20,800 BTU per kilowatt hour. At Palo Verde, August power is at $195.80 per megawatt hour, down $12.80 from a week ago. In fish counts, we got fish people on today. We're doing fish counts. 40,584 sockeye salmon were counted at Bonneville yesterday, June 26, bringing the year-to-date total to 239,575. October through September flows at the Dalles for water year 2022 are currently forecast to be 107% of normal, and April through September is at 111%. Outflow at the Dalles peak from last week occurred on June 21st at 8 a.m. at 425.5 KCFS. Day ending elevation in Grand Coulee yesterday was 1,285 feet, meeting its target for 4th of July festivities at Lake Roosevelt. And peak outflow this past week was at 269.9 KCFS on June 27th. Spending a beat at Bonneville's Balancing Authority, peak load this past week was at 8,303 on June 27th at 5:40 p.m. During load's peak, hydro generation was at 14,367, wind gen was 281, conventional units were 787, and nuclear was 1,123, all units in megawatts. And so for March, April, May period sits at negative 1.1 Oceano Nino index. The multivariate ENSO index for April to May is negative 1.68. And the SST consolidated Nino forecast indicates that La Nina is favored to continue through the Northern Hemisphere summer, with slightly increased probabilities through the Northern Hemisphere fall and early winter 2022. That's a 58 to 59% chance. You can find those indicators on the NOAA's website. This week in the NOAA climate forecast, just stay right there and go to the climate forecast. The 6 to 10 day outlook has temps below normal and precipitation above normal for the region. 30-day outlook issued June 16th shows equal chances for above or below normal temperature and precipitation for the region, while the 90-day seasonal outlooks issued on June 16th shows a likelihood of above normal temperatures and below normal precipitation for the region. Special thanks to AnswerG for letting us use their dashboards. That's all we've got for this update.
Thanks for the report, Paul. Great job out there.
Bam, we did it. Anything you like in there that want to talk more about? We're going to talk more about the crash in that. I mean, it's not really a crash. It's still like $6, but the decrease in natural gas prices. We got a story about that. We also got a bunch of stories about fish. Anything else interesting in there? Just crickets. I wish I had a crickets one. No, I mean, Kurt didn't even prepare for this episode, so he doesn't have anything to add. And
I'm always prepared. No,
you are always prepared to talk about everything.
My thought on that, I used to be an energy trader, and but I haven't, in this role, that's not what I do. I don't follow energy prices every day or every month. But it is interesting to see with what a good water supply year we're having, that July was still able to maintain a 10,000 heat rate at Mid-Columbia. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Although obviously there was a pretty big drop. I think you said like a $6 or $7 drop from the last time you reported. But still, that's a big number considering how much water is going through the system. So it does imply tightness for kind of the rest of the West.
Great insights, Kurt. You just that's why you're so good at this. That's why you're in an Adrimus championship. You just go put your trader hat on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, dust that sucker off and let's get going.
We're here for it. Anything you wanted to add, Casey?
I find the ENSO stuff interesting. I was hearing that if we go into another winter of La Nina, it'll be a triple dipper, which we hardly ever see. So that's kind of cool. Yeah. Third winter. The winters is what we care about because that's when you get more, hot, colder weather and wetter. Although I did hear a webinar on drought that said they think that the Northwest, the wet weather we've been having is La Nina influenced too. So
yeah. And it's also good now. Let me test this. Your fish people, ocean conditions impact fish a great deal. Does La Nina help the fish conditions? Is it colder ocean conditions? I actually don't know. I probably should.
Because the La Nina and El Nino is determined in the equator. So the ocean condition, it's the temperature at the equator. So that doesn't directly relate to it, but a combination of La Nina and good ocean conditions is really good for fish. So, and so that's what we're seeing right now because they had a really good year last year and going into the summer. So.
Yeah, the fish count sounded great. Did they sound great to anybody else? I'm not an angler. I don't know.
That's amazing. They are amazing fish counts, and that is really great because there have been some really dire predictions for the near term. I know one group out there have been saying that salmon might go extinct in 5 years, looking, at the previous 5 years of data, not including last year, which was up a little bit. And that doesn't mean that salmon are doing great or in the shape that we would like them to be, but it certainly is a welcome reprieve from those kind of more dire predictions. And so hopefully we'll continue to see those good trends. And yeah, both from a La Nina perspective and a hydro perspective, or both from a fish perspective and a hydro perspective, it is exciting to see the La Nina because it does, given the dire drought that the Southwest U.S. has seen, it's a really positive sign in general for Northwest hydro conditions. Now, it is also a little bit depressing for those of us who have lived through this second quarter, and as people have been calling it, January. But that being said, I feel like I'm always hedged as a hydropower advocate, because if it's raining, that's good for hydropower, and if it's dry, it's good for my recreational life.
So with the better numbers, I've seen the stories that KC has written, of biologists predicting that we've reached a tipping point in terms of salmon populations, and there might not be any coming back. So with the better fish count numbers, how long does it take until we'll see, with the numbers last year and the hopefully better numbers continuing this year, how long will it be until we see how that affects the projections of the salmon population?
Oh, wouldn't we love to be able to answer that?
Well, no, I just mean, like, how long does it take for biologists to take these real world fish counts and put them into their models and say, well, it looks like we're on an upward trend, or no, this is just a bump, but then we're going to go back down, or what have you?
Well, NOAA is saying that basically that they predicted this bump this year because of the great ocean conditions when fish were going in. We had the worst ocean conditions ever in 2015, 2016, 2017. And that's what led to all of this like extinction worry. But now it's flipping around. And so some are still worried that, climate change is driving some huge problems in the ocean. And some people say that means we need to do everything, including take out dams, to protect them when they're in the freshwater. So your turn, Kurt.
Yeah, no, I think you said it all really well. I mean, there's always been variability from year to year. It does look like ocean conditions probably are the primary driver. The question is, like, a couple of years ago, the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change declared basically the previous 50 years as a period of unabated ocean warming. And the NOAA Fisheries last year released a study that said if the ocean continues to increase temperature at its current rate, that Chinook salmon populations could be extinct by 2060, so within 40 years. And so that wasn't as dire as some of the forecasts we had seen more recently from some groups, but it was really eye-opening. And I think the question is, yeah, we've had a couple good years and that's great, but what is going to be the longer term trend in the ocean? I think that is the real big issue is, are these a couple good years, but on a trajectory of warming that is going to be bad for salmon overall, or could there be a flip in long-term ocean conditions? So that's the thing we won't know. That's the thing we can't predict. And I think it's a question you're asking. And Casey's right. We would love to know that, but the forecasts are not promising long-term for the ocean. Next up is our weekly walkthrough electric utility and electric utility adjacent news in a segment that we like to call Public Power Desktop. Sarah, give us the typewriter.
I'm getting there.
Paul, give us the typewriter. I guess, yes, Sarah's not here. Sorry.
Take it away, Dan.
All right.
Take it away, Dan.
Draft report developed for Washington Governor Jay Inslee and Senator Patty Murray dropped June 9th, and it's looking at the impacts of breaching the 4 lower Snake River dams, the impacts on energy, ecosystem health, agriculture, navigation, transportation, tourism, and recreation, and the region's economy. So just a few items that it's looking at. According to the report, breaching the 4 lower Snake River dams would improve passage for salmon, steelhead, and lamprey, and it offers the best hope for removing the 4 Snake River salmonoid species from the Endangered Species Act list. But breaching the dams would cost between an estimated $10.3 billion and $27.2 billion. It would require congressional approval and, of course, take years of planning, collaboration, and engagement. The report acknowledges that the need to have replacement resources in place prior to breaching, and it states, quote, if the Lower Snake River dams were to be breached, the replacement portfolio needs to be in place and demonstrating that it's producing energy and providing services to the grid before the dams were breached. If the replacement portfolio is not in place, the Pacific Northwest region would experience increased challenges. These include the reduction in peaking capacity, risk of congested transmission lines, particularly near the Tri-Cities, increased power rates, and potential increases in carbon emissions due to increased emitting generation to compensate for the loss in capacity, end quote. The resource replacement has many challenges identified in the report, including who will pay to replace the energy infrastructure and who will determine the replacement portfolio. The report is open for comment until July 11th at 5 p.m. Pacific time. You can find a link to the report in the show notes and more coverage and clearing up from KC Mehaffey. Kurt, let's start with you. What are your thoughts?
So, we obviously at Northwest River Partners as hydropower advocates, we were really interested in what the draft report would say. We appreciated that we had the opportunity after we requested it to sit down with the consultants who were putting together the draft report. And I say, though, that we were disappointed that I don't think that what we had to say was reflected in the report. The issue is when you read the report, basically at every turn, even though the conclusions are like really big numbers, but as you read through the report, it kind of tries to diminish the role of the Lower Snake River dams throughout the report. For instance, just kind of at random when they're talking about the carbon-free hydropower that the Lower Snake River dams provide, then they throw in kind of a random methane number that they attribute to the dams without showing how they got to that number or anything. They just cite a paper that talked about how one might calculate it, for example. So they say, oh yeah, hydropower is methane, but then they don't talk about the life cycle, the carbon life cycle footprint of any of the replacement resources that might be used to replace it. Another example of that is that they basically say, oh, well, climate change is going to restrict the dams, but that's really debatable. The University of Washington Climate Impacts Group has essentially said we may get more precipitation long-term under climate change scenarios, although they do predict that we'll have an earlier runoff, that more of that precipitation will fall as rain in the winter than as snow, and that there will be lower stream flows in the summer. We get that, but that is also a super long-term forecast, and at the heart of it, it's still predicting that we'll get about normal precipitation on average, over the course of time. So, there are just things baked in there that seem to try to take these digs at hydropower. Another example of that is they say that litigation and other things are going to further limit the availability of the Lower Snake River dams. And that's certainly not a science-based statement. It is a statement of opinion, and it's pretty speculative. So I think there's a lot of things in there that are troubling. And then if you look at the other side of the ledger, when they talk about salmon, they do not question any of the statements that were made by groups that want to see the dams removed. So they basically say that, salmon are, going extinct, and that breaching the dams will bring them back in robust numbers. And, as you know, there's a lot of debate about whether exactly how beneficial breaching those dams would be in recovering salmon populations, but they don't make any caveats in those statements. They don't talk about the discrepancies in the science. And they just assume that if the dams are removed, that salmon come back in really robust numbers. So I think, I can't say it any other way except to say the report feels really biased kind of against the hydropower system, even though it calls out these really big costs. And so I think that's a really big problem. And then from a utility perspective, for all of our utility members out there that are trying to get to a zero carbon grid, the report doesn't do what I think would be required analysis to really look at what it takes to get to a zero carbon grid both with the dams in place and without the dams. And that's the only way that you can know what the effect of removing the dams would be, right? Is if you have to run the models with them and without them. So our organization did commission such a study. We're going to be releasing it. What's today? Today is the 28th. We'll be releasing it tomorrow on the 29th publicly, and briefing the Murray-Inslee consultants on it as well, and making it available to everyone to see. But the numbers are really shocking about the impact of losing the lower Snake River dams, not just financially, but in terms of what it means to the required build out and to carbon and everything else.
So if you get it to me, we can probably include it in the show notes along with the Murray-Inslee report. We can get it out there. This will
I'll do that.
It'll probably be available by the time this is published. The first time you came on here, one of the, I think, greatest insights, not greatest, but I'll frame it that way anyway. One of the greatest insights you provided during that conversation was that we actually need more nuance around exactly these resources. That what we need to make sure is that we need to be empathetic to the shared mission of recovering the salmon, but also understand the nuance related to what the value provided by these and the effect of removing them, and making sure we have that nuanced conversation about ocean conditions and that link. So I want to say I really appreciate your seat at this table, because I do think you bring empathy and you do try to be honest in your analysis and the way you present the topic. So thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. I really appreciate that, Paul. I mean, and maybe that's my criticism of this report, is it really lacks nuance. Yeah. And so, we all, I think everyone agrees who's, from the Northwest and has lived here, that salmon are sacred, that we should be helping salmon. But, when the nuance is lost, then you just, kind of get to, well, we got to get rid of the dams, and I think the issue is much bigger than that and much more complex. And so I appreciate you mentioning that.
Yeah, KC, Kurt has a position. He is an advocate, and we love that you bear that with nuance and with empathy, Kurt. That's a very valuable in an advocate. But KC, you've heard from other folks that think of this differently. You are an independent journalist. Any other nuance or thoughts you want to add to the conversation?
Well, I think some of the things that I took away from it is one of the biggest significant aspects of it is that it says congressional authorization will be required. And so that's a big lift. I mean, that's a heavy lift, especially now. I guess
what are you talking about? Congress is so easy. Sorry, I couldn't resist.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I expect they'll try to put it in the Water Resources Development Act, which is basically the annual funding for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and Congress does pass something every year on that. So, but it's not always an easy, it's not going to be an easy thing if they put Snake River Dam removal money in there, or directive to Army Corps to take them out or breach them. So I think that's a big thing that Murray and Inslee put that in there and didn't just leave the issue aside, I guess. I mean, they're saying it's necessary. So that is a big thing, I think.
The other big thing to kind of follow on that, Casey, not to cut you off, but I did also note that they comment that a replacement portfolio is necessary before you do this too, right? Not only is it going to take congressional action, but then you need to have a replacement portfolio in place. And one of the things I think a lot about, being concerned about climate change and the impact on the oceans and our environment, is that replacement, that the time frame for climate change and the replacement of those resources. We need additional carbon-free resources within the Northwest to replace other carbon-emitting resources. And you do have this concern about resource development and resource development timeframe. And can you do it twice as fast, because you're both replacing the lower Snake dams and carbon-emitting resources? And like that, the nuanced conversation that comes from the constraints on resource development and the availability of additional carbon-free resources, and that timing around replacing carbon-emitting versus carbon-free resources.
Well, and I mean, that's one thing that jumped out to me in this report was because it's not just saying we need to have a plan, but that it's steel in the ground producing energy, which is going to take, a build out like that I mean, especially with supply chain constraints now, which, and who knows when those will abate, but then also just the scale to which the West it plans to build out renewables just in general, just to transition, like you were saying. Yeah, I mean, how long will this take? And by the time you finish that and prove that this replacement portfolio is functional, would there be any salmon left? I mean, like, honestly, the time frame that we're talking about, it seems like it's almost, it might be too late, even if you went ahead with this. And I'm not advocating for one way or the other.
But no, I mean, you could easily be beyond the 2060 timeframe that NOAA Fisheries has said that the ocean could end, most Chinook salmon populations in the along the Pacific coast. So absolutely, it's a very valid question.
Yeah, and not to lose the empathy, like that's not something we want. Like we want to preserve these fish, and we, if the price tag for preserving fish is hard to compare it against because it's comparing against the existence of a species, and so the cost it was hard, but it's also a timing of what is the effective approach to preserving.
It like any species almost any species you lose, we have to be cognizant of the fact that these are I don't know what the phrase is, but I mean, it's not just this one species goes, if it goes, but like the orca population would collapse. And I mean, Casey, you know better than I how they fit into these various fish fit into the ecosystem, but they don't exist in a vacuum. Their disappearance will have dramatic effects on the ecosystems of our rivers in the Northwest.
Casey, do you have one thing before we move to the next story?
I'm going to follow on what Dan just said about American Indians and the importance to them. And I think that's the other thing that this report kind of brought to forefront is that they are the driving force behind this. I think in May 2021, the 57 tribes of the affiliated tribes of the Northwest Indians passed a resolution supporting dam removal. And that's the first time they've done that. And so I think that's the driving political force too, behind the Inslee-Murray report and behind what's to follow.
I think everything that everyone said is right. I do think what does get lost in this is whether hydropower is kind of friend or foe. And I think that's a really big issue regarding the salmon, right? Is, if climate change is the greatest threat to not just the Snake River salmon, but to all the salmon, stepping back in our decarbonization efforts is not the right move for salmon, and maybe not for orcas as well. My good friend Paul coined a phrase, and I never get it right, but the question is, do the salmon need the dams? And it sounds ironic, but there is a real issue here, and I think that's why the conversation has to be nuanced, and I think that's why we have to look at these issues really carefully. So with that, I am going to take my next cue, which is, okay, Paul, we're ready for the typewriter. Casey's got the next story.
Australia's main wholesale electricity market, the Australian Energy Market or Operator, or AEMO, suspended the entire national electricity market for the first time in its history on Wednesday, June 15th. According to their press release, AEMO took the step because it was impossible to continue operating the spot market while ensuring a secure and reliable supply of electricity for consumers in accordance with their national electricity rules. This is significant for electric market enthusiasts like us, because AEMO is an energy-only market with the highest price cap in the world at 15,100 Australian dollars per megawatt hour, which is approximately 10,400 US dollars per megawatt hour. Plus, it's also a region with deep penetration of renewable, intermittent, and battery resources. Wholesale prices surged leading up to the suspension due to two main factors. According to an article published by The Conversation, written by Joel Gilmore and Tim Nelson. The two factors, high coal and gas prices, driven by the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and roughly 25% of coal power stations being out of action. The coal power stations are unavailable because of maintenance, as well as the sudden exit of 3,000 megawatts of power due to unplanned outages. The actions inform shortfalls in energy-only markets in deep decarbonization and falls into the themes Professors Jacob Mays and Frank Wolak have been studying.
Professor Mays and Professor Wolak, the interviews I've done for Public Power Underground on electric market enthusiasm, I think this is incredibly informative to the Northwest as it considers the evolution into a market and the way we formulate and think about resource adequacy in long-term markets. Very happy that the Western Power Pool is actually considering this as a core tenet of the next evolution of markets and their resource adequacy program. And if you haven't listened, I'll just give a plug to the Jacob Mays or Frank Wolak interviews yet. I think they're outstanding. I'm very proud of them. I think they're incredibly insightful people. And, we got academics to talk like real people. So pat us on the back. Bam. Oh, there we did it. Anything, Dan, that you took from or takeaways from this story or
well, I just want to jump in here. And the only thing I didn't like about the Jacob Mays and Frank Wolak interviews is that you didn't invite me on, because they were fascinating, and those two guys are on my list to call and make use of, because just for anybody who hasn't listened to them, go check them out.
I think the price cap associated with this and the thinking about energy only markets, like we've seen it in Texas and Australia, where they have these problems with resource additions. And Professor Mays talked about this translation of, investments decision into earlier timeframes that I think was spot on. What's going on here. And specifically in Australia is like, they've got batteries, they've got intermittent resources, they've got coal resources. Anyways, keep going. I just love talking about this stuff, as you can tell.
I know. I'm curious what your first date with your wife was like.
We didn't talk about
That's probably why. That's good. So one thing I thought was interesting about this, and I haven't had time to dig into this deeper, so I'm not exactly sure all the ramifications of it. But so we mentioned the high price cap for AMO, but part of the problem here was they triggered a safety net price cap at $300 per megawatt hour, and I think that's Australian dollars. So I don't know, that's 200 some dollars in US per megawatt hour, which is less than the cost of generating power from gas and possibly even coal there. So that took a lot of resources out of the market. So I'm curious, like, how much of this was, just what? So what are the lessons for us in terms of like artificially creating problems?
Yeah, so I think one of the takeaways is your reliability externality, as Professor Wolak, I think, first explored in 2001, I want to say, but then was included in his most recent paper that we talked about, which is even if you have this high price cap, there weren't enough resources even at that price cap to enter the market and meet that power balance constraint. So even at that high price, it wasn't doing any good. So then they had to go through these administrative procedures and they lowered price caps, which then caused problems because then the generators didn't voluntarily, which is why they had to shut down the whole market, right? But even
which
at that
price
high
cap
price,
were you talking about?
So even at the $15,000 price cap, there weren't.
But they
enough
didn't
resources.
even get to that. I thought.
That's because there weren't enough resources, right? They didn't get to it, and then they ended up entering the administrative state, and then they lowered it, and then the lowering. That's why the lowering it, and then
drove more resources out
drove
of the
it
market.
out, and they were like, this doesn't even work right now. But it all comes down to, as I've interpreted, and they hopefully they'll never listen to this or any of my podcasts after talking to them, because they'll be like, Paul, you got this all freaking wrong. That's not what I said. But it comes down to, in my understanding, the translation of those. It's not an efficient translation of those high peak prices that you think you can get if you have a resource in the market into long-term investment decisions because of things like the reliability externality. Kurt, you've been nodding your head, and I just want to hear it.
I want to jump in. So I'm excited about this. I mean, I think they're you nailed it in a lot of different ways, both of you. But I think that one issue is it takes time to get new generation online, right? So the idea is you want to send these price signals so that the new generation comes online, but at the same time, you could bankrupt a market. I mean, seriously, like during the 2001 energy crisis, not only did one of the nation's largest utilities go bankrupt in Pacific Gas and Electric, that was, I guess, the first time, but the state of California was actually headed towards bankruptcy too, because they started guaranteeing purchases on behalf of the state utilities so that the state wouldn't continue to have blackouts. So, that kind of a price signal is in some ways isn't helpful. You really do need like a longer term price signal. You need not just like these peak price signals that can make everyone go bankrupt, but you need kind of a longer term price signal, but to encourage a longer term investment.
So Kurt, basically what you're saying is that's not a price signal. That's a price signal.
That is an awesome Crocodile Dundee reference, and very well done. Dan, I did not know that was in your repertoire.
Neither did
Really
I.
good. I've lost sleep, like tossing and turning, thinking about these topics as I've after these interviews, thinking, oh, I should have said this, I should have done that. I think it's a fascinating topic to investigate more, especially for people in the Pacific Northwest. I look forward to talking to more people about these fascinating topics.
Can I say one more thing though?
You can keep going. Absolutely, keep going. Are you going to tie it back to fish though?
I could, maybe.
No, please don't.
No. Okay. So now what I was just going to say is the other challenge though, and this is important, is like these organizations do, the markets can really dissuade long-term investment as well, because, if they create a really high cap and then people sell into it and then all of a sudden they're forced to refund everything or they take these risks, what it creates is a sense of uncertainty for the investment, right? Because you're like looking at that and it's like, oh yeah, well, these guys made all this money, but then like people went to jail and money was refunded and some of them lost money because the price cap dropped too low and things like that. So I think it's really important for these markets to be well thought out and stable, and that the stable with a longer term price incentive, I think that's what allows comfort in making more investments. So I think that it has to be a combination of those two things.
And as Professor Wolak mentioned on our recording, the long-term contracts, so an incentive to enter into generators to enter into long-term contracts with load, because once they enter into these long-term fixed price contracts, then their incentives align with load in minimizing the cost to meet that contract cost. So I really found that proposition around the value of long-term contracts for resources, because that gives them both the incentive, like it gives them the certainty on revenue streams, plus it aligns the generator companies' incentives with loads to have a low cost way to meet that.
The challenge is though, and I'm no different than the rest of everybody, we want to have it all, right? If the daily price or the spot price is low, then we want to get out of our long-term contract because look, I could be buying at this cheap price, but the long-term contract is 3 times that cheap price. But then when the spot market goes to $10,000, then I want my long-term contract. And so that's the rub is, the energy markets tend to be very boom bust because it's a very capital intensive industry. And so there are going to be times when your long-term contract is losing you money, and there's going to be times when it's saving you money. Those things, I guess, people like me want to have it all, and that makes it really challenging to manage.
You know what's really advantageous in those circumstances? A preference right to an advantaged resource.
That's good. I'll look into that.
Don't tell anybody. Freeport's LNG terminal in Quintana, Texas, has been shut down after an explosion at 11:40 a.m. local time on June 8th, 2022. The LNG export terminal accounts for around 16% of U.S. liquefied natural gas export capacity. U.S. natural gas futures immediately reacted, with prices falling from highs at Henry Hub of over $9 per MMBTU on June 8th to around $6.80 per MMBTU on June 22nd. Freeport is one of 7 U.S. liquefied natural gas export terminals, which receive gas via pipeline and liquefy it before loading the super chilled fuel onto tankers. The terminals have helped the U.S. emerge over the past few years to vie with Qatar, and Australia as the #1 exporter of LNG. Freeport receives about 2 billion cubic feet of gas per day, or roughly 16% of total U.S. LNG export capacity. The operator said on June 14th that it does not expect the terminal to return to full service until late 2022. Dan, you have any thoughts on this?
Oh, I always got thoughts on everything. I mean, it is just.
Are they infotaining thoughts?
Oh, well, I don't know. I'll do my best. So yeah, I mean, this is just another reminder of how integrated and exposed we are to the world energy market, as much as our conversations are about within regions or even the West wide. We have to be humble and acknowledge, and especially as we're planning, consider that we are affected by stuff going on in Ukraine. And at the conference last week that was hosted by News Data and CJB Energy Economics on wholesale power markets, Jeff Richter, formerly of PG&E, formerly of Enron. He's principal at Energy GPS. He really was talking and focusing on about just how volatility in the natural gas market is endemic. It's here to stay. There's structural stuff going on that, Paul, you can explain better than I can. A lot of what he said was really, all of it was insightful. A lot of it was over my head. But the Freeport explosion particularly drives home, though, how old and brittle are the natural gas delivery infrastructure is around the West. I mean, we've seen this, with Enbridge, what was it, SoCal Gas, was it Citygate right down there? Issues with Diablo, or no, that's something else. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, there's just been when Enbridge shut down, the gas coming through Sumas basically dropped to zero, and prices shot up, not surprisingly. So nobody right now with decarbonization is excited to invest in natural gas infrastructure. But at the same time, how do you get to a decarbonized future without using natural gas as a bridge fuel?
There's a great paper, and I'll include it in the show notes. I forget the authors, but it was co-authors, and I wish I could remember off the top of my head. We included it in the Jacob Mays show notes, but they talk about the transition and the need for an intentional transition from our current system to the decarbonized future because of this concern about investment in natural gas infrastructure and making sure those services are available during this transition period. How often have we basically transitioned away from an industry while still needing that industry as an essential service? Casey, is there any fish angle on this, or any angle you want to take on it? We want to at least loop you in.
I think you guys covered it great, so thank you.
That's the best. I was going for the applause, and then I went for the laugh track. I think we're ready for the next one, Kurt. I think we covered that one pretty well.
Okay, Paul, we're ready for the typewriter, and Dan's got the next story.
On Thursday, June 17th, the U.S. Department of the Interior transferred management of the Dwarshak National Fish Hatchery to the Nez Perce Tribe. The tribe and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service previously co-managed the hatchery for 18 years. Secretary of the Interior Deb Haaland signed the ceremonial transfer documents alongside Samuel Penny, chairman of the Nez Perce Tribe, and Mike Connor, a member of the Taos Pueblo and Assistant Secretary for the Army Corps of Engineers Civil Works Division. The transfer won't change how the hatchery is funded, and the facility will continue raising millions of Chinook, coho, and steelhead every year. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service will continue its long-standing partnership with the Nez Perce Tribe by continuing to provide support for the hatchery through the Idaho Fish and Wildlife Conservation Office and Pacific Region Fish Health Program. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Director Martha Williams was quoted in the Department of Interior's press release as saying, quote, The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's wildlife management and conservation efforts are strengthened when we incorporate indigenous knowledge and rely on the best available science. I am proud of the work the service has done to manage the fish production at this hatchery jointly with the tribe, and I look forward to its continued success as we work to ensure that the fish hatchery and surrounding community continue to thrive together. We found the story in Newsdata's June 22nd meter readings newsletter. It was published in Spokane's Spokesman Review by Colin Tiernan. Links to Colin's article in the Department of Interior press release will be included in the show notes. Casey, what can you fill in for us?
My takeaway is kind of the bigger picture of how much more tribes in the Pacific Northwest and tribes across the country are becoming, partners in all kinds of things. And they have been a partner in running this hatchery for a long time. And so, there's no big changes expected. There's no changes in funding, no changes in amount of funding needed. The fish hatchery, the Dwarshak National Fish Hatchery is one of the 26 salmon and steelhead hatcheries that are funded by BPA under the Lower Snake River Compensation Plan. And so I think that's kind of an interesting aspect to it, is that BPA is going to continue to fund it. And I think the compensation program was set up basically because of losses expected from the Snake River dams, including Dwarshak, which is a blocking dam. They don't have fish passage there. But I guess just looking at the bigger picture, you see, tribal leaders now leading the Department of Interior, the National Park Service. We have, Jamie Pinkham, who was executive director of Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, has a big job at U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. We have tribal members becoming part of the federal infrastructure, program. And then there's also a bigger recognition in this idea of using indigenous knowledge. So the intertribal, or I'm sorry, I think it was the Columbia Rivers, the Northwest Power and Conservation Council's independent scientists said that in one of their reviews that we should be using more indigenous knowledge. And that was a big change, I think, in 2020. So we're seeing it in all kind of angles, and it's interesting.
Casey, what do they mean by that? It kind of sounds like it could just be like a throwaway line. Right? But so what is it something substantive that they are really trying to bring on, or are they just trying to window dressing to make it sound like they're taking tribes more seriously?
And that's a really, really good question. And I haven't explored deeply enough. I haven't seen the council, actually, the Northwest Power and Conservation Council, make any changes in their review of their programs, but that was the expectation of the independent scientific review panel. And I wonder if it doesn't mean, we don't necessarily have to do all this monitoring to know that, I don't know. I mean, some things are common sense, I guess. And when you have tribes that have managed, fisheries, maybe they don't need to do all the monitoring and evaluation that is required and expected to get BPA funding.
Yeah. I'd be really curious to know what the tribes think it means.
Well, I'll just chime in real quickly and say, I think that phrase actually initiated with the tribes. And I think that they've definitely been strong advocates on their behalf, that let's say that we, and I say we kind of like just kind of the general kind of fish operations and power operations communities might say, well, where's the scientific report, or et cetera, et cetera. And if we don't have data, then maybe, we shouldn't follow a certain policy. And I think that the tribes have been strong advocates, that they have, millennia of knowledge that's passed down, and that should count too. So I think it's a really interesting question because there is like this in our world. So often we're like, follow the science. And I think that I'm not saying that the tribes are saying that we shouldn't follow science, but I am saying that I have heard them talk about people having respect for, the need for people to have respect for their knowledge that's been passed down by generations. So I think that's what it means to them.
Thank
Yeah,
you for
good.
that very empathetic synthesis of that position. That's some empathy showing through. Thank you.
Oh, good. Well, good.
Your superpowers.
I feel empathy. So good.
Along with the belt, the Anadromous Championship belt, we should get you an empathy badge.
That's
too.
I would love to have 2 belts. That would be excellent. Thank you.
Yep. I wanted to follow up on one thing, Casey. So you mentioned, I believe there are 26 fish hatcheries as part of Lower Snake River Dam that Bonneville funds. Lower Snake River Dam Conservation Agreement is what I thought I heard you say. Something.
Compensation plan, and they're meant to compensate, for the fish that won't come back because of the dams.
Yeah, it's the mitigation. Is that the right word for mitigation for part of the installation? How many of those are co-managed by tribes? Is this the one, or is this a common framework at other fish hatcheries along the Lower Snake River Dam that they're co-managed?
I don't know the answer to that, and so I'm going to go look it up after we close here. No, I imagine at least a few more. I mean, because you've got the Umatillas, you've got a number of tribes in the Upper Snake River that would be want to co-manage with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, who is basically running that show, the compensation plan. So I'm guessing that there's at least a few more, if not many more, but that's totally up my guess.
Very, very curious to know more. I think it's a good practice, and hopefully it's a trend where we can support through our rates the good work for salmon recovery. That's what all our goal is, right? To try to make sure we have healthy fish populations. So
Paul, hit the typewriter, and Paul, this is the last story. It's all yours.
Quote, fish managers in the Columbia Basin are turning to the ancient art of falconry to help control some of the large colonies of birds that feed on young salmon and steelhead as they migrate to the Pacific Ocean each spring. Unquote. That's Casey's lead for our last story out of News Data's June 17th edition of Clearing Up. Last year and again this spring, falconers contracted with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to find out whether the birds of prey could scare off gulls at the Dalles Dam. And this spring, the Yakima Nation also hired falconers for several weeks and successfully delayed nesting at Miller Rocks above the Dalles Dam. The islands support large colonies of California gulls and ring-billed gulls, which commute to dams upstream and downstream to prey on juvenile salmonids. The falconers use a wide variety of birds of prey, including falcons, hawks, and owls. Alina Blankenship, a master falconer, what a title, that's a great title, showed off her birds of prey at the Northwest Power and Conservation Council's June 14th meeting. Blaine Parker, who works for the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, told the council that avian predation continues to be a problem despite decades of effort to control the birds. Blaine continued, using falconry also doesn't cost millions of dollars to implement, and the gulls are mostly just scared away from the site. Since gulls don't exclusively eat fish, they may find a new food source when convinced to nest in a location. When not to nest, we don't want them nesting, when they're convinced not to nest at a location close to a dam. Aside from lower cost of implementation, falconers are federally licensed. The dam operators and tribes don't need a permit to contract with them. We'll include Casey's story in the show notes. Kurt, any thoughts or follow-up on this one?
Did you say the falconers are federally licensed?
I did say that.
Yeah, so federally licensed falconers for federally licensed dams. It makes perfect sense.
It does. I think this is awesome, like good news story. It's a new innovative way to do it. I'm excited about it.
No, I mean, it is. It does sound amazing. And also just as an aside, I went out on a tour of Ice Harbor Dam, and there are like a lot of pelicans out there now as well. So I'm wondering if we could do something with the falcons and that. I don't know what exactly happens if a falcon sees a pelican, but anyway, I'd be interested to find out.
We're just asking questions. Casey, do you have the answers?
Pelicans are a lot bigger than gulls. I'd say that for sure. And I don't know if, I know they were talking a little bit about cormorants and Caspian terns in the estuary, which are basically fish-eating birds. I mean, that's what they eat. Gulls, if you scare them off and they find a nice little dump somewhere, they'll be happy. But these guys need fish to eat. You know, it's kind of like telling the orcas to get out of Puget Sound because we want the salmon. They're not going to go anywhere, or they're going to go somewhere. If you got them, convince them to go out of Puget Sound, they'll go somewhere else where there's fish. So that's the danger. And the falcons don't kill the birds. They just convince them to nest somewhere else. And so they're thinking it might work with gulls, might not work so much with, and I'm thinking pelicans are pretty much fish-eating birds. So I don't know, but
probably.
Interestingly, Idaho had a story about pelicans this week too, Idaho Fish and Game. So I'm working on a little brief about that this week.
Nice. Dan, Master Falconer sounds like a job that may be in demand soon. Are we going to have to change careers and get a cool title of Master Falconer?
Why are you even asking?
Yes. We're going to do it, right?
Yeah, 100%. I already ordered the Falcon glove. It's actually, I love this story. I mean, part of it is just I love the fact when after trying all these, like putting our fancy solutions, tech and all this stuff, we come back, we're like, you know what? You know, it's worked for like hundreds and thousands of years. Let's get some falcons. I love the fact that we're going back to just something that is just kind of simple and straightforward. And could
this be an example of indigenous knowledge that you were trying to pick on earlier?
Pick on? Excuse me.
I don't know. Investigate?
I just wanted to see if it was, like I said, a hollow, throwaway, patronizing term from feds, or if there was some substance behind it.
Okay. Investigate.
As far as
journalistically investigate.
Explore.
Pulitzer Prize winning investigative journalism investigation.
Okay, you done?
Not hanging an effigy, but the falconry is something I've seen some news stories about using solar panels, like using falconry around solar panels as well to prevent the birds pooping on solar panels, which reduces their efficiency. I've seen some stories. I'm on vacation this week. I didn't go investigate to try to link to those stories as well. And I'm probably not going to do it in the show notes, but if you want to send them our way, we can talk about them some other time, because I think it's not just useful for hydroelectric dams. It's maybe also be useful for things like solar power.
Yeah. Anyway, it was a great story, but we're all done with that. And so hit the typewriter and let's move on.
That's a long one.
We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll close out the episode with a quick rundown of the news stories we didn't get to in our TLDR segment, but we're calling Energy West Lite.
The Northwest Public Power Association believes in public power. For 82 years, NWPPA has supported public power utilities and other associates in the greater Northwest by offering education, training, communication, government relations, and services like RFP and job postings. In addition to public power, what else is important to NWPPA? Local control, member needs, integrity, and quality products and services. It's been a while since I've read this promo. It's a little jaggedy, but I'm getting it through. Today, NWPPA proudly serves 155 member utilities and more than 325 utility industry associate members. Learn more, register for a class at nwppa.org. That's nwppa.org. NWPPA believes in public power. Next up, we're TLDRing our way through the news in a segment we call Energy West Lite. I'm Paul Dockery.
And I'm Miller.
And we're lightening up Energy West. Yes, no notes. Then you're first.
Okay. BPA may be set up for a significant boost in secondary revenue sales this summer, given a late spring runoff, high natural gas prices, continued drought in the West, not including the Northwest, and a forecast calling for above normal temperatures. Steve Ernst covers the story with snippets from an interview with BPA's manager of weather and streamflow forecasting, Eric. I'm sorry, I don't know how to say Eric's last name, but I'm going to go Pitlick or Pidiak? Pitlick. Pitlick. Anyway, with Eric in the June 24th edition of Clearing Up.
Busy week for Steve because he also covered news from Portland General Electric. He reports this week that Portland General Electric says acquiring all the renewable energy it needs to meet Oregon's 2030 clean energy goals sooner rather than later may be more cost effective. The company intends to acquire 180 average megawatts as approved by regulators, but says locking in 400 average megawatts now would be cheaper in the long run. That's average megawatts, something Energy Twitter gave me a hard time about earlier this week.
Really? What did Energy Twitter not like?
Energy Twitter doesn't like average megawatts, and Jacob Mays maybe hadn't heard of average megawatts in normal context. It's a Pacific Northwest thing. We just got to get them on board.
Got it. All right.
Some of them may listen.
Idaho Power customers will see a 1.5% rate increase after Idaho regulators approved a request to speed up depreciation on its shares of the coal-fired Jim Bridger power plant in Wyoming. The utility had asked for a rate increase of more than 2%, but the Idaho Public Utility Commission said that would be too much given the economic conditions facing customers. For more, follow coverage by Dan Catchpole.
Our own Dan Catchpole. I'm not sure if he'll be in frame right now or out. Out of California energy markets, the California Public Utilities Commission took actions to maintain electric grid reliability at a local level, along with other measures aimed at resource adequacy. This follows administrative law judges issuing a draft decision that it is reasonable to modify the resource adequacy measurement hours to align with the California Independent System Operators' revised availability assessment hours.
The California Independent System Operator, which conducts a local capacity requirement study that serves as the basis for the RA program, estimated the capacity needed for all local areas to ensure long-term reliability is 25,499 megawatts for 2023, 23,902 megawatts for 2024, and 24,221 megawatts for 2025. The grid operator also suggested system-wide flexible capacity requirements ranging from 23,448 megawatts in November to 17,971 megawatts in July. You can see they're very precise there.
They're very precise. It's a very accurate forecast.
It's very
For
accurate.
more on the CPUC decision, check out Linda Daly Paulson's story in the June 24th edition of California Energy Markets. You'll also find coverage by Rory Sweeney on a white paper issued by the CPUC proposing a policy roadmap for distributed energy resources and rate structures.
California ISO recently closed out the comment period on its EDAM straw proposal. Among the filed comments, CAISO's Independent Department of Market Monitoring said the ISO should clarify in detail how the EDAM and EIM designs will determine in which balancing areas a real-time shortfall in the EDAM's energy schedules will end up. That's a long sentence.
It's a long sentence.
It is a long sentence. According to the Market Monitor, CAISO has verbally stated the EDAM balancing areas that pass the resource efficiency evaluation would share the consequences if the EDAM footprint faced a potential supply shortfall due to the realization of high net load uncertainty. They don't make it easy on you here, Paul. And that's like a nice summary of the comment. So more details covered by Jason Fordney in California Energy Markets.
Yes, and Jason really highlighted an important topic. I think this is a really important nuance. I'm glad the Independent Market Monitor, Department of Market Monitoring is at least asking for clarification. In personnel news, Matthew Shretnick has accepted a position at Northwest Requirements Utilities as its Director of Operations and General Counsel, another long title for Matthew Shretnick, a very tall man. Shretnick will be leading all legal responsibilities for NRU, including, among other things, rate cases, BPA-related litigation, upcoming residential exchange negotiations, and post-2028 contract negotiations. He will also play a key leadership role in internal governance and long-term strategic planning for the organization.
I was really excited to see that news as well. Excited for Matt. It sounds like a fun new opportunity, and I know that he'll be a really great member of the NRU team. So welcome, Matt. Clatskanie PUD made some news. I don't know if it's appropriate for me to read this instead of Paul, but
Well, it didn't feel appropriate for me to read it. It didn't feel appropriate for me to read it because it's about Cloud Sky PD. We're independent here. Like we're journalists here, right?
Esri, an international supplier of geographic information software, system software, web GIS, and geodatabase management applications, published a case study on the work Clatskanie PUD did using ArcGIS or ArcGIS to generate ArcGIS to generate their wildlife mitigation plan. Clatskanie
wildfire. This is an important clarification. It's wildfire.
Oh,
not
I'm sorry.
mitigation.
Can I start all over?
No, absolutely not. We got to keep going. We're running out of time. My wife just texted me. Dinner's ready.
Okay.
I'm on vacation.
Okay. Wildfire mitigation plan. Clatskanie's GIS analyst. Is it
Seffi Fox. Seffi's great. Seffi may listen. And I'll just say she's great.
Good job, Seffi. Utilize detailed asset information, outage history, population density, vegetation, height and type, road condition, and LiDAR elevation data to create a set of submodels and raster surface inputs using Model Builder and ArcGIS Spatial Analyst, which resulted in a map of discrete fire risk areas for the entire utility system. That's another
really
long
cool
sentence.
Stuff. I'm a huge fan of ArcGIS and geospatial analysis, and Seffi does some great work, and this article highlights some of the great work she does. Okay, awesome. Other brief mentions from the Energy News Roundup. Board members of the publicly owned Arizona utility Salt River Project on June 23rd voted to pursue a legal appeal of the Arizona Corporation Commission's decision to deny an expansion of the Coolidge Generating Station, a natural gas peaking plant outside of Phoenix.
The City of Menlo Park and Block Power are working together on a public-private partnership designed to provide the city with building electrification services.
Zero Avia, a Hollister-based zero-emission aviation firm, will be working with Otto Aviation to develop a hydrogen electric powertrain to power Otto's Celera aircraft.
BrightDrop, a General Motors technology startup focused on decarbonizing last-mile delivery, made a delivery of the first 150 electric delivery vehicles to FedEx in Southern California.
And the last bit from the news roundup, a microgrid for the San Pasqual Band of Mission Indians is now in service at the Tribal Government Center. The facility was commissioned and ribbon cutting ceremony was held June 9th by the tribe at the site in Valley Center. The microgrid includes a 156.25 kilowatt solar parking canopy and a 240 kW 480 kilowatt hour battery energy storage system, and also integrated two smaller existing rooftop solar systems. Big fan of microgrids at Public Power Underground.
That's all for TLDR. Thanks to Public Power Underground's production partners at News Data for letting us use their leads, and thanks to Ian for compiling them for us this week.
If you like Energy West Lite, you'll probably like News Data's Energy West with similar themes. We actually stole their drum intro for the Energy West Lite segment that you're hearing from the Energy West podcast that Dan is a regular contributor to. So it comes out weekly. It is way shorter than Public Power Underground. And that's my promo for it. Now back to the podcast to close it out. That's Energy West Lite. Okay. Anything we want to dig into deeper, Dan? What do you got?
No, I actually just finished up. Just incidentally, I was a little late getting on this because Jason and I were wrapping up our weekly Energy West, or recording it. We weren't able to do it yesterday. But yeah, Jason Fordney and I do it every week. Please check it out, Energy West.
And if you want to learn more about the Salt River Partners proposal that Abigail was on last week's, and they talked a lot about the SRPs and the ACCs and the plants and the expansion and the denials and all this stuff. They got into it. Abigail was great on there last week.
And then also just to plug it, so we've got the weekly roundup of here are our top stories, but then we also every few weeks have an in-depth conversation with somebody, some really interesting kind of free range conversation with super smart people in the energy sector.
No, I mean, I think that first of all, I have to leave because I have to go make a presentation. And secondly, I think we covered a lot of good stuff today. I really enjoyed this. So I'm sorry for not preparing. Once we get through this Murray-Inslee process, I'm hoping my life will be more normal. And Dan, it was really nice to see you again. And thank you guys for having me on.
Great to have you, Kurt.
See you guys. Bye-bye.
Okay, so that's this week's episode. That was great. We covered a lot of stuff. The next episode will be the season finale, which we'll be recording on July 18th, maybe, probably. Dan, we got to work on that. We're going to be doing a mailbag for the season finale. The mailbag concept was one that Dan brought up. I thought it was great. It harkens back to the Susan Ackerman retirement show where we did a mailbag segment. I think it'll be a fun one. So if you have any questions for Dan and I, send them to us. Send them by text, send them by email, find us on Twitter. I'm at a power manager or an average power manager because I think that's a funny little thing. Dan, what's your Twitter handle?
At Catchpole. So DCATCHPOLE.
Yep. So send us any questions you got that you want us to include in a mailbag, and we're going to figure out who the other guests are going to be. Maybe we can get some more fun people to come answer mailbag questions, and it'll be fun. To make sure you don't miss it, or bonus episodes in the meantime, because let's be honest, there probably will be bonus episodes. You can sign up for an unintrusive newsletter with links to all the ways to consume this fascinating content at publicpowerunderground.substack.com. Otherwise, you can subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. You can also find merch on Shopify by searching for Public Power Underground. Hey, Casey, Dan, you guys were great. Do you feel valued and appreciated? Was this fun?
Oh, yeah.
Do you feel valued and appreciated, Casey? Do you like coming on here and talking about fish? I don't know anything about fish.
I like my title, co-star. I mean, I've never been a co-star before. This is awesome. And,
Yes.
I thought it was like excellent when I worked for the Wenatchee World, and I was only a freelance writer, but they called me World Special Writer. He was so enthused. Wait till I tell him I'm a co-star now.
You're a co-star now. You really elevated. And a podcast ambassador. You're both now. So you can, I don't know if podcast ambassador, you should put that on a resume. Dan, do you feel valued and appreciated? Yeah. You don't have to be subscribed to News Data's newsletters to get this podcast, but it sure makes the podcast make a lot more sense. That's a good promo line. That's good writing. That's all for this week. Thanks for tuning in.
Douglas firs where the waters cut through. Down her wild mountains and canyons she flew. Canadian Northwest.
Public Power Underground is a production of Clatskanie IPUD and News Data. The views expressed are our own and not the official views of Clatskanie IPUD, News Data, or the organization of the guests also appearing on Public Power Underground. Public Power Underground is electric utility and electric utility adjacent news from a power department's perspective. It's written and directed by Clatskanie IPUD's Power Department, led by me, Paul Dockery, and it's edited and published by the stellar team at Pioneer Utility Resources, led by associate producer Sarah Wooden. Our theme song, Roll On Enthusiast, was rewritten, performed, and recorded by Aaron Guillory and Ian Bledsoe. Special thanks to our celebrity guest host, Kurt Miller, for agreeing to participate in this week's episode. Thanks for bringing the insights, putting on the trading hat when we needed it. That was wonderful. He's not here to hear the applause. It sounds like it's unlikely that he's ever going to listen to this podcast because he's so busy, but maybe you'll get here and hear the applause. It'll be really nice. Public Power Underground for electric utility enthusiasts. Public Power Underground, it's work to watch.